Welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. As always, I'm your host, Pat. Ready to get this show on the road. Been away for a very brief respite this time. I was on my Sigma grind set there, recording videos weekly. I intend to get back on that, or a semblance of something to that. Took a week or so off. I had my birthday get-together last weekend, celebrating my 29th. Don't know what I'm going to do next year. And so I took the weekend off. I just didn't want to be bothered with putting together quality content, editing it, and all that stuff. So I've been brainstorming about new approaches to videos, and I thought this would be a cool new series to mess with, entitled Shallow Dips, as opposed to Deep Dives. Get it? It's very clever. Just for those who want to just kind of wade in, you don't need to own every record by every band. I don't think I have a complete discography of any particular artist. Even my most favoritist of bands, St. Vitus, missing a few records. The Accused, missing a few records. Agnostic Front only have like their 80s and early 90s output. The list goes on and on. So I figured it'd be cool to kind of wade in with a couple of bands that are super important to extreme music, as it were, and that I've been picking up a few reissues and other records by recently that I've been a fan of for some time now. I can't think of a better band to start with than Antwerp, Belgium's own Agathocles. Before I get into that, though, before I get ahead of myself, mention what we're listening to. This is Swordwielder from Sweden. They're from Gothenburg. I just looked that up. Much in the style of that traditional stench crust that I talked about a few updates back. This is fantastic, thick, foggy, heavy, powerful stench crust core punk stuff. Yeah, it's very, very good. Very strong Amoebics influence, if you can't hear in the background. They just came out with a new EP. It came out last year in Europe, but it was reissued on these shores by Profane Existence, who I just got a big order from. So that'll be spinning in the background at some point. I'm sure I'm going to have to flip it over. So, Agathocles. Agathocles are a band, if you're not familiar, a grindcore band. Self-stylized Mincecore. It's a genre name that they've assigned to themselves. It's been around since 1987, I want to say. And they're known for having a comical amount of releases. An insane amount. I did a little screen grab here. Should be playing right now. That's a lot. I didn't even count. We could look on Discogs. Let's see on Discogs. Let's see how many releases they have. Let's just, for funsies, let's see here. I didn't even look it up, but it's well into the hundreds. And they're good. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't be talking about them if I didn't like them. From Giel, Antwerp, Belgium. They've been around since 85, actually. 656 releases and counting, at least according to Discogs. Get rid of that white glow from the Discogs page there. So yeah, and I've been aware of their existence since I used to pore over the photocopied Relapse catalog when it was, still photocopied back in the 90s, before I was born, because I'm 29. Let's not do that gag. Anyways, when I was a kid, I used to flip through the Relapse catalog and also read a couple of different zines that were out of Rochester, I think, at the time, Rochester, New York. And of course, there was Metal Maniacs and Sounds of Death, and Agathocles, even back then, was just a legendary band for just being this band with an insane amount of output. And for years, I didn't have that much by them, and actually, also, for years, I kind of didn't take them seriously, kind of poo-pooed them because they were that band that had an insane amount of split 7 inches. Grind bands tend to do that, and I think Agathocles really laid the groundwork for that kind of stuff. Going back to a couple updates back, the Stench Crust update that I shot, I did mention Felix von Havoc and his old column in MRR. He did another column around the same time as the Crust one, where he talked about grindcore, and I think his quip about Agathocles was you'd have to annex an edition onto your house to store all your 7 inches. I only have a few, and these are the ones that I've had for the longest, because for the longest time I was like, they're a grind band, all their stuff sounds the same, I'm good with a handful of 7 inches. So I have the Agarchy 7-inch. This came out on Flabby Records in 1991. I have the If This Is Cruel, What's Vivisection Then 7-inch, which is a Seraphic Decay release from 1990. And then I have the split with Psycho, Hail to Japan, from I think also 91 if I'm not mistaken. I just remember seeing ads for this in different magazines and zines, and it was just so iconic looking. They stole the cover art from Confused. Those are members of Confused on the cover. And then on the flip, you've got the crazy Chainsaw Priest. The Agathocles tracks are live. The song Hail to Japan doesn't seem to have anything to do with Japan. It's a spoken word about commercialism and music and anti-MTV and stuff. They also dedicate the last song to fans of Swedish hardcore. And I think there's a big list of like bands they give props to from Swedish and Japanese hardcore in here, which is kind of a nice little primer if you don't really know about those bands that much. We think it is our duty to remember the real roots of the current grindcore scene, and by this we don't mean some bands which are generally accepted as being the grind gods, but we mean bands such as Gaia, Confused, The Swankies, Revenge of the Whores, never heard of them, Shitlickers, Kanziat Utset, and tons more. Remember that some of these bands were already active in 1977. So yeah, it's Japanese and Swedish bands, a few bands that I'm not really familiar with. So it's kind of cool. They were always kind of, even as they were kind of bursting out of grind in the underground and playing more and more with death metal bands and rubbing elbows with maybe more commercially leaning stuff, they were still out there giving props to some really underground acts, which is nice. So these are live tracks. Yeah, everything's pretty tight, actually. It's kind of noisy, you know, the kind of trash can drums and some feedback, but you can tell everything that's going on in the music if you've developed an ear for grindcore. If you're not used to listening to grind, it might just sound like a wall of noise to you, to be honest. The Psycho side is awesome, but we're not talking about Psycho right now. Maybe I'll do one of these for Psycho at some point. The Agarchy 7-inch is very thick, well recorded, straightforward. It is kind of grind, but it's also leaning into like a more meaty death metal territory. Very good. There's let's see, just 5 songs on this. And If This Is Cruel, What's Vivisection Then 7-inch. This is a Seraphic Decay release, so if you're looking to find this, it's probably getting pretty expensive. This is actually a little bit more towards the grind side of things, which makes sense. It came out before the Agarchy. A little bit more raw on the recording side than the Agarchy 7-inch. A lot more songs on it, if I'm remembering right. So a little bit more punk quickness to the songs. Yeah, there's 1, 2, 3. There's 8 songs on this. Cool center labels. Purple. Got the Seraphic Decay logo there. So I had these 7-inches for quite some time. I enjoyed them. And then just recently, the past couple years, I started diving into their records. And hindsight is 2020, because all their records all their albums, their first 5 or so, are all kind of different from each other, and all are really good in different ways. Some are better than others. Before I get into their albums, I forgot. I just got this. I always wanted this as a kid. It's a reissue of the first demo, Cabbalic Gnosticism. I'm glad I remembered to mention this. Just got this from Grindfather Productions from the UK. This is a cool reissue. This is super noisy, raw grind stuff. Bordering on noise grind. If you like the bands on like Mortville Noise, like that kind of stuff. Super abrasive. Recorded probably live to a boombox. I don't even think it's a 4-track. It sounds like the contents of an entire zoo fighting in a blender kind of thing. Really good, though. So, to get into their albums, I had those 7-inches, just got that tape. I hadn't really messed with their full lengths until a few years ago. I want to say I got Black Cloud's Determinate from, I believe I got it from the Bind Room distro 2 or 3 years ago. I liked it okay, I filed it, and then the past year or so, I've just been kind of gradually picking up their first 5 or so records, and I'm kind of bummed that I started with that one, because it's okay. It's a decent grindcore record, but There's other records, as you'll see, that have a lot more personality, that are just objectively better, in my opinion. Their first album, Theatric, Symbolization of Life, it's included on this 3-disc box set. Back in Black has been reissuing all these. I think there's Benediction, Hellbastard, Virus, all this random stuff that's pretty cool. If you're a CD collector, these like 3 to 5 CD box sets are a nice value. They have a lot of stuff on them. There's an Onslaught one, I want to say. I've got a bunch of them. This is an odd sort of collection because it has their first album, Theatric, Symbolization of Life, and then 2 albums that are way later, Mincer and Grind as Protest. I haven't spent much time with Mincer or Grind as Protest yet. This is a relatively new purchase. I listened to a couple songs off of Mincer, and it just sounded like a very concentrated, okay, this is our sound. We have the high vocals and low vocals screaming and growling at the same time, kind of blurry grind stuff, but with a much more modern production. It sounded like they nailed and gelled their sound. Jan, the key songwriter guy who's been the mastermind behind this group since the beginning, sounds like he kind of probably codified stuff at that point, kind of made a uniform sound. It's fine. What's interesting with this 5 or so records and the 7 inches leading up to this is they went through a bunch of different lineup changes. They have a different lineup on the 7 inches than they do on the first album, and then they kind of solidify later, from what I read. And they go through a couple of different sounds. And Theatric, Symbolization of Life is almost like a straight-up chunky death metal record. It lapses into grindcore territory a fair amount, but I feel like sonically it has a lot more to do with the Massacre demos and when Napalm Death went more death metal, Utopia Banished and Harmony Corruption stuff. Even the early UK death metal stuff like Benediction. It has a lot more doomy and mid-paced rhythms to it. Jan's vocals are very monstrous and death metal-y. It's really good. I like it a lot. It's just not at all what I was expecting in terms of grindcore stuff. It's great, though. I think the original version of it had a ton of songs from splits on it. Their first, I think all these that I'm talking about, their first 5 or so records came out on their own label, Cyber Records. They've all been reissued on different labels. Self-Made God from Eastern Europe reissued a lot of them. Theatric, Symbolization of Life on this includes some live tracks instead of split songs, which is, it's okay. It's neither here nor there. I would have liked to have had a bunch of songs from the early splits on it. There's the Mincecore history compilations that have all their stuff from the 80s onward. There's 4 volumes of it or more at this point. But yeah, if you're looking for some good early 90s death metal stuff that has blasts here and there, but it has a lot more of a kind of a mid-paced, chunky kind of flair, that isn't too overproduced, it isn't too tight either. If you like Gorefest and stuff like that too, that's another name to check. I'd say this first Agathocles full-length, Theatric, Symbolization of Life, would not steer you wrong. Let me just pull out the booklet here. That's what the cover looks like. Then, the aforementioned... Ugh, my hair. The aforementioned Black Cloud's Determinate. Reissued on Self-Made God, like I said. New cover art. Not really a big fan of the super Photoshoppy style here. I'll put the weird original pink cover art next to my head here. Much cooler. much cooler. I wish they would have kept it, but what are you going to do? This is a lot more lo-fi than the previous one. This is, I'd say, if you're looking for stuff that's almost akin to early Carcass, not as much of a hot mess as Rika Putrefaction, but that level of the vocals are way more gore grindy. The deeper vocals are really gurgly. There's a lot of high-pitched screaming, real trash can sounding cymbals all over it. It's got a certain kind of cold quality to it that might even appeal to fans of necro black metal even. It's a cool release. On a lot of their records, they'll throw in something to spice things up and kind of create variety. They do it a lot more on the records I'm about to talk about after this. They do have like a weird reggae song on this for seemingly no reason that is pretty interesting. It's like Europe, talks about Europe's fairy tale, which is cool. But yeah, there's one or two songs on this too where they start to involve like more of like a straightforward hardcore shout that brings to mind those Scandinavian hardcore bands and maybe some British stuff like Chaos UK. They do that a lot more on later records, which I'll talk about. But it's a little bit on this, but for the most part, this is just nasty, ugly grind stuff. Not quite to the level of ugliness as the demo, but close. Up next, I'd say album number 3, Razor Sharp Daggers, probably their best. And all these came out really close to each other. I mean, almost year by year. Let me see here. I don't have it memorized. So Theatric came out in 92. Black Clouds, 94. Yeah, 94. This came out in 95, and then the next two I want to say came out in 96 and 97, respectively. So, cranking out an album every year, tons of releases in between, tons of splits mostly. It's crazy because I'm like, how much time did they spend in the studio? Even if they were just in the studio recording 5 splits at once, you know, just blasting out grindcore songs. That's a lot of work, including full-length albums and presumably playing gigs. You know, I don't know if they toured much or whatever, but god damn, it's just a lot of stuff. Anyway, Razor Sharp Daggers is awesome. It's probably the best. If you are looking to dip your toes into some Agathocles, I would say, and you're more into grind than death metal, or you're craving something more grind, I would say this or Hummarrogance would be the ones to go to. This has the catchiest songwriting, the best recording quality. It's gotten back to a thicker, kind of heavier sound. The vocals are less like cartoonishly gore grindy. They're more of a back to a growl. There's a lot of variation. There's a few songs on this that are slower and that are almost like a proto dystopia or His Hero Is Gone kind of crusty heaviness that leans into sludge. There's, you know, a touch. The last song on here, Fear Not, is almost like those instances where Napalm Death kind of wore their Swans influence on their sleeve, if you know what I mean. Just that kind of heavy, droning Swans influenced, sludgy kind of stuff. The rest of the stuff is grind and death metal, and some hardcore, all mixed together in a tasteful melange. There's, as I mentioned before, more and more of this kind of really not snotty, but attitude-laden, I'd say UK and Scandinavian hardcore punk influence coming through. What's going wrong in the really, really cool stuff, especially the song... What song is it? Enough. That song is really, really good on here. Like anything else, I'll try to include clips. I don't want to get demonetized. Not that I'm making any money off of these, but, you know, when you get the little yellow $sign, if you do videos, you know this. If you do the yellow $sign or the red $sign, like half the people don't see your views that normally do, which sucks. I know Agathocles probably don't care about that themselves, but they might have stuff through streaming services, and sometimes the streaming services own stuff. It's like CD Baby and stuff like that, so I'll see if I can put up clips. But yeah, as far as like the most well-rounded, memorable, just great sounding grindcore, this is probably the best one, in my opinion. Then you've got Thanks for Your Hostility, which is kind of a funny title and a weird cover too. So I got this new camera, which is very nice. I'm sure you can probably notice the difference here, but I'm still getting the hang of autofocus and stuff like that. So, yeah, I don't know. That's the cover. You're not missing much by it being slightly blurry. It's these weird Cupid dolls and, I don't know, biblical Roman crucifixions, and I don't know what's going on with this, but they're wacky guys. This did not get reissued on Self-Made God. CZR and Grindcore Noise Productions. I don't know. I just find the cheapest copy I can of these things. Tons of bonus tracks on this one too. I didn't look up where they're all from. Might be from their studio recordings. They're not live, but whatever. At any rate, the album proper it's good. It's actually a lot more punk leaning than the last one. There's a lot less of that dirgy stuff. There's plenty of grind on this, obviously. It's a grind band. But there's a lot of, I want to say like almost half the vocals are not growly grindcore vocals. They're a lot more like clean shouted, again, like hardcore kind of stuff going on with this. So, I mean, if you like a lot of D-beat and like European hardcore stuff, 80s hardcore punk from Europe, Chaos UK, Disorder, noisy hardcore punk, and grind mashed together, maybe this will be for you. Then finally, we've got Hummarrogance. This is number 2 for me as far as quality goes. This gets weird. This seems like they were probably hitting the wacky tobacco a little bit more than usual on this last one. And this is on Self-Made God as well. This reminds me a lot of Exit 13 from Pennsylvania, I think. The guy from Relapse's grindcore band from the early 90s, Bill Yerkowitz, I think his name was. If you're into 90s grind, you should know Exit 13. They involved a lot of weird jazzy parts and like strange, almost psychedelic moments. They were very into weed. That's what this reminds me of. There's a lot of like that kind of bring it down on the bass, like jazz, do. They do that like on 3 or 4 different songs, which is very, very odd. It's like film noir grind, you know? But it's cool. It's good. There's a lot of the other Token stuff that I talked about. Token, no pun intended. Wah wah. And as far as the hardcore moments go and great blasting, this also sounds really, really, really good. But there's a lot of really odd moments. Very strange, almost like off-the-cuff, weird, borderline experimental kind of elements to it, which makes it interesting. That's our shallow dip into Agathocles. I don't need any more Agathocles than that myself. If you are a big fan of them and they have some later records that you want to prop up, feel free to, share in the comments. Lately, I've had more people following me from Europe and a lot more people that are into hardcore and stuff. So maybe viewers from over there, if you have anything to add in regards to Agathocles, let me know. All right, so the next shallow dip we'll be looking at everything except the 2 most recent full lengths by Macabre, and maybe missing a few EPs here and there. I love Macabre. I kind of go in and out of like different eras of music that I get obsessed with. Obviously, it's part of the crux of this channel. You know that if you watch regularly. And often like the impetus for me going nuts and going deep into stuff again is reading books. I'm a bit of a reader sometimes. And these Uniforce and Coven zine omnibus collections put out by Billy Nocera from Razorback Records, Evil Speak Productions, are awesome. This was Billy's zine from 90 to 92 when he was living in Long Island. And then the Uniforce zine from 86 to 89. This was Mark from Impetigo's zine way back in the day. And especially this is incredible because you can track the progress of hardcore and punk and thrash metal and all that kind of developing into death and black metal over just a short 3-year period. And it got me... I always loved stuff like Impetigo and Repulsion and all this raw early death metal stuff and grindcore stuff. And it got me kind of wanting to revisit a bunch of those crucial earlier bands. And I already had a couple of Macabre releases, but I was like, oh, well, I don't have those on vinyl. So I bought some ones on vinyl and some ones I didn't have. And I guess I should just start at the beginning. Grim Reality. I ordered from Macabre's website directly for this. I also got some shirts and some other stuff. Reasonable prices, if you're interested. Link in the bio. Link in the description. But, yeah, this is their first EP. They only had a demo before this called Shitlist, which it was reissued on Extreme Music on CD, and then really, really early on, I think not complete, but it was on a 7-inch. Anybody has a copy of that they could sell me or trade me, let me know, because I love that recording too. It's just vicious hardcore, like crossover kind of stuff with a little tinge of evil metal to it. It's awesome. And you can certainly hear the hardcore and thrash metal crossover stuff on all their material, I think. But they're an early pioneering death metal band, in my opinion. There's something on their blurb on Metallum saying that they were one of the bands that influenced death metal but weren't death metal. I call BS on that. I think they're firmly a death metal band myself. But this is their raw beginnings, their first EP. It's got 6 songs. One of those deals where they remixed it and remastered it, but included the original recordings too. I like the earlier, rawer versions myself. They're a power trio, 3-piece. I've always had the same members, which is really cool considering how long they've been around. 3 guys from the Chicago area, just singing about serial killers and murderers and pretty much nothing else for the entirety of their career. And this is as primal as it gets with them, even early on, very tight, very fast. I will say if you don't like high-pitched, screechy vocals, you might not like Macabre. They do back and forth between this really unique kind of high-pitched vocal style and a growl. And then as they progress through their career, things kind of mellow out a little bit. But this is awesome. I mean, this quick, over in, maybe like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Songs repeat, like I said, but overwhelming. It's a crushing little EP there. And then you've got their full length, Gloom. This is a reissue from the early 2000s that came out on Decomposed and Hammerheart. Decomposed was their imprint, if I'm remembering correctly. Originally came out on Vinyl Solution, which was that label that put out the first Bolt Thrower record. Also had different cover art. This is touched up a little bit. It looks like an early version of, like Photoshop or computer art, The original version also was like the similar concept, but like a kind of poorly drawn. Neither cover's really that great. This is actually slightly better, and I usually don't go for the computer-generated art over the original, but I'll make an exception in this case. My first experience hearing this was hearing, like I said, the Corporate Death Comp and hearing the song Embalmer and being completely blown away. Kind of blown out production, which isn't really common for death metal. The speakers sound like they're ripping apart. The guitar is super abrasive and the really, really lockstep perfect in sync bass and drums. The rhythm section of the 2 of those guys, Dennis the Menace and what's the other guy's name? Dennis the Menace and Nefarious, I believe. Yeah, Dennis the Menace and Nefarious. They're so in sync and so perfect, and the bass is perfectly loud. It's not really distorted. It's just very forceful, and just these high-pitched, insane, shrieking vocals trading off with growls. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Even this early on, I think they could give the quote-unquote tech bands of the day a run for their money. We're talking Atheist, Cynic, Death when they started to get more jazzy, all that shit. I mean, I like that stuff to an extent. First Atheist record's pretty good. The Cynic demos. I really like Death Human. Sadist got a little fancy pants around Swallowed in Black and the record past that. I like that stuff. Macabre really could have been one of those bands if they wanted to. You can hear their riffs and how deceivingly complex they are, especially on the record after this. And they just didn't. They just wanted to play fast and write weird, like, nursery rhyme songs about serial killers and stuff like that. And it's awesome. And they explore that more on the next one. This came out, I believe, in 89. Songs were written as far back as 86, it looks like, according to the back of this. But originally came out in 89 on Vinyl Solution. Then in 93, on Relapse Nuclear Blast, Sinister Slaughter came out. Iconic cover. Of course, ripping off the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper with recreating it with serial killers. Crazy. And this, they really do kind of spread their wings a little bit, flesh out their songs. They do get into more technical kind of territory, especially, I want to say, the end of Vampire at Dusseldorf. What's That Smell? The song about Jeffrey Dahmer. Yeah, they get a little bit more complex on this and a little bit wilder. There's not quite as much of the full assault of, like, relentless speed that they have with their earlier records, but it's very good. Production's better, but still, like, not overproduced. Fairly technically challenging, but fun to listen to. Killer death metal. And that was the stuff that I was familiar with for a long time. I bought Dahmer when it came out, and I didn't really care for it at the time. just recently it's kind of started to grow on me a little bit. It is insane that they decided to write a complete concept album with 26 songs chronicling Jeffrey Dahmer's entire life. It is a little weird to look at it with tinted glasses from present day, just because all the serial killer stuff is so mainstream these days. You know, there's the Dahmer movie, there was My Friend Dahmer. Was that a TV show? It was a comic book first, the My Friend Dahmer movie. There's all these other properties covering like Ted Bundy, all the heavy hitters. I haven't seen an Albert Fish one yet because that guy's just too gross, I think. He doesn't have that sexiness of Ted Bundy. But the Mind Killer series that was on, was it Mind Killer, Mind Hunters, whatever that is, that series on Netflix. All this true crime stuff is very mainstream now. It's what, you know, normal people are into, which blows my mind because I was obsessed with this stuff when I was in my early 20s and I wasn't in a good place. Like the fact that regular people are just like, yeah, all right, John Wayne Gacy. Like, okay. Interesting times we live in. But regardless, back in 2000 when this came out on Nuclear Blast, you know, it was a pretty heavy thing and weirdly gleeful and lighthearted, and I think that's what was a little bit off-putting to me. Not that I couldn't handle the fact that they were combining serial killer stuff and death metal with like nursery rhyme style, you know, old public domain catchy kind of tracks and stuff. It was just those songs themselves felt a little goofy to me. But every single time I listen to this, I like it a little bit more, and I'm kind of singing along. It's, you know, In the Army Now, about Jeffrey Dahmer joining the army, to Grandmother's House We Go, you know, all the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with the Oompa Loompa thing. It's just demented, wild stuff. And it's an interesting listen. Then the last one that I've checked out by them, Murder Metal, which is great. It's a great, dare I say, I mean, musically speaking, matured record. They've dialed everything that they need to dial in on this. They're still kind of involving some of the, you know, public domain, children's song stuff and weaving that in. There's a good amount of brutality. They're not doing the guttural vocals as much, which is a bummer, but like any other band, it's harder and harder to do that. I believe Corporate Death did both himself. I heard on the earlier tracks where he would go from low to high, so I think it's just him. I may be wrong with that. Maybe the other guy doing the backing vocals did some of the growls too, but going from that high shriek to growls it's got to destroy your throat. So everything's a little bit more evened out, a little bit more even keel. The technical aspects are a little less flashy than Sinister Slaughter. They kind of service the songwriting a little bit more, but overall, like a good matured record from Macabre. And then after that, they were gone for a while. They did that Grim Scary Tales record, which I keep seeing pop up for really cheap on Amazon, like on CD. It's like $5. And that Carnival of Killers record, which came out really recently. I think it came out like a year or two ago, maybe. I've read different reviews. I guess they do a lot more clean vocals on it. It's a lot more in the campy kind of variety. I don't know if I'm just getting around to liking Dahmer, so I don't know if I'm ready for that in my life yet. I've checked out a couple tracks, it's okay. But as far as their early material goes, those first two albums and that first EP, I mean, it's just bulldozing, just destructive music. It's so good, it's so tight. They really carry on that DRI and Cryptic Slaughter and Accused thrash and evolve it into death metal. The trade-off vocals with a high and low, it's awesome. It's really, really cool. And at the time, that was a very taboo subject that they were approaching. You know, I can't imagine that they didn't get some scary pushback during the Satanic Panic era in one way, shape, or form. So yeah, Macabre and Agathocles. You got Murder Metal and Mincecore. This has been the first edition of Shallow Dips at Ground Zero Salem. So wherever you are, have a good weekend, weekday, evening, morning, or night. GZS out.